going to present the results of something we've been working on since the beginning of the pandemic of COVID in Mexico, and has to do with the orchestration between the Minister of Tourism and the impact that this pandemic has had on tourism and on health issues. We've been working coordinately, and we are able to get a closer look to the touristic sector in terms of this pandemic control. And now that we are approaching to the new normal, we are planning and foreseeing very precise guidelines as to how to deal with the situation with the touristic sector. Ricardo Cortés Alcalá, the Director of Health Promotion, he's been a focal point with the touristic sector, and he will elaborate on the technical specificities from a technical perspective. Dr. Alomir, would you please do the technical report? Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Let's start this daily briefing. Today is day 59 of our National Safe Distancing campaign, and this is our daily briefing number 82. Let's take a look at the national scenario. Practically, there's been no changes in regards to yesterday, and the active pandemic around the world, in this case the pandemic itself, is 25% only of confirmed cases over the last 14 days. This represents only 1/4 of every confirmed case around the world right now. Now, this is an update of the national figures. More than 193,589 people tested. People have been tested whether to confirm them positive to COVID or rule them out. 56,594 were confirmed cases, whereas we had 105,129 negative cases. Only 12,085 cases are currently active in Mexico. Unfortunately, we've had 6,090 confirmed fatalities. Next, here we see the distribution of the burden of the disease by state: 44.3 cases per 100,000 inhabitants. There's not much variation in the shades of the states. As the days progress, we might have new results, and there might be some entities turning into a darker shade. Now, we still have 3 entities that have surpassed the maximum range of 3,000 cumulative cases. Now we're going to focus on the active epidemic in Mexico: 12,085 confirmed cases. This map looks pretty stable too. The cumulative burden over the past 14 days, people who started developing symptoms over the past 14 days, is still within a stable range. On the next slide, we see the same distribution, but in ascending order. We see the total numbers per state, and we have those entities with the highest burden of the active epidemic in the past 14 days. Now, this map shows the incidence rate. We are able to compare entities based on their populations, and we see that those states in darker shades of green are those who are showing the highest transmission rate, and they are the engine of the epidemic in Mexico, so to speak, right now. You will see how the numbers change. We see the same distribution of the incidence rate here, but expressed in graph form in descending order. Tabasco is catching up with Mexico City in terms of their incidence rate, and Yucatan is also increasing its rate. Now you can see the distribution of the unfortunate 6,090 fatalities. In orange color, you see 726 suspect fatalities. We're still waiting for the lab test results, with the majority of these fatalities who are still waiting for laboratory results were in people infected in the past few days. Here we see the daily distribution of fatalities per federal entity, and we are still waiting for the confirmation of more fatalities because we are still awaiting for laboratory results of 726 cases. This is the epidemic curve, confirmed and suspect cases. We can see that the trend remains stable. It's still showing up an upward trend. 40-45% of suspect cases might be ruled out, but the ones who are confirmed will keep up with the trend. 55% of the suspect cases are distributed in Mexico City and the state of Mexico. That's where we're having the heaviest transmission rates. Here you can see the cumulative burden of the disease. 4.1% was the increase versus yesterday, an increased number of 2,248 new cases. Those bars in orange are showing lower growths. However, the trend is very similar to that of previous days. We've been confirming more than 2,000 new cases every day, some days more than 2,500 cases per day. And this is the beginning of the rise of the pandemic peak in federal entities that 15 days ago were not showing high numbers, and this added to those states that are reaching their peaks. Then that's why the burden is getting bigger every day. Over the past 24 hours, out of these 2,048 new positive results, if we are to add the negative tests, we account for more than 6,000 cases tested. Here we see bed availability and hospital occupancy. 39% is the occupancy rate for today all across Mexico. And we know this because 97% of hospital units, reporting hospitals, submitted us that information. Here we see the distribution of the 39% that is different depending on the state we're talking about. Mexico City, the state of Mexico, and Guerrero show the highest occupancy rates. However, they are still showing some availability, and that's why we can still serve patients. Here on the next slide, we see ICU beds, and we see availability, even though occupancy rates have increased in Mexico City and Baja California and the state of Mexico. On those states, we still have availability to serve patients with the severe acute respiratory infection. That's it on my behalf. Dr. Alomia, thank you very much. I just want to complement what you said with the following message. Remember that the COVID epidemic in countries that are large in territory, it doesn't behave as one single epidemic. We've mentioned this before. In relatively small countries, the different populations, villages, small-sized cities, settlements, they have higher mobility across cities, more than within one same city because they are small. And this entails some synchronization. Cases occur on similar times across different communities in one same country. However, when we have a large country in terms of territory, as it is the case of Mexico, with more than 2 million square kilometers, or the US, or Brazil, China, India, it is very difficult to have epidemics happening in synchronicity across the territory because of the size of the country. And I said 2,000, but it's actually 2 million square kilometers territory. And the behavior of the different epidemics are scattered, and sometimes they can act in synchronicity when there is mobility between two cities or two states, and that's when synchronicity might happen, but not otherwise. Why do I want to remind you of this? Because what I'm going to tell you next about the touristic sector has a lot to do with the opportunities of starting moving into new normalities. And success, I will repeat this again, the success is all due to the Mexican people because we're getting control over the epidemic thanks to the Mexican people. I'm going to show you some representative graphs on the epidemic curve in certain zones, in certain regions, some cities that illustrate encouraging scenarios concerning the control of the epidemic. And when we see higher number of cases day after day, yeah, cases are increasing, but the country as a whole, the pandemic is still growing. But if we are to look at this individually at the different states, you may notice that there's places like Mexico City that account for 1/4 or almost 1/3 of those daily cases that are in its peak. And there are some other entities that are showing a descending trend that it's something that you can recognize very clearly. You can see the value of Mexico here. Epidemic curve of confirmed cases is what you can see on the screen, and they illustrate the trend of the spread through time, the spread of occurring cases. It is worthwhile to mention that epidemiological surveillance isn't only on confirmed cases. We have a very timely and sensitive way of monitoring this through suspect cases, and that's how we take the pulse of what happens every day without waiting for the laboratory confirmation. It is important for me to say this because this gives us sensibility in terms of the epidemic behavior throughout the country. So you see the epidemic curve, you're familiar with the projections of these groups of academicians from public study institutions in Mexico and CONACYT. What you see on the pink bars is what's happening in real time. In the Valley of Mexico, we're right at the peak. We've said several times that it's not one specific day at one specific time, but it's a period of time when you see the pandemic plateauing and then the epidemic going down. This is Tabasco. I have a specific message for people in Tabasco today. In Tabasco, we see the behavior of two curves, the so-called bimodal curve. This is a technicality that means we see one peak here and we see even a higher peak over there. What this means in epidemiological terms is that at any given point, in average 7 days prior to May the 10th, at the beginning of the month of May, probably there might have been some loosening up of the social distancing measures, which led to having this phenomenon of the transmission of the epidemic skyrocketing. So a message to people in Tabasco, please be especially careful, because this is exactly what we don't want to see at the moment of reopening. And I don't want to single out Tabasco, its people, nor its government, but I want to point out something of national importance. If this is to happen in other states or in the country as a whole, it'll be completely undesirable. So we need to finish with the national safe distancing campaign in full order. We have a few days that we need to stay at home, and afterwards, when the reopenings start, it needs to happen orderly, staggered, and with and being very cautious. Let's go faster. I would like to mention those specific things. And here, in connecting with tourism, Cancun and the Benito Juarez municipality, we recognize the effort from the people of Quintana Roo and their authorities, their Minister of Health. The municipal government has a lot of merit. It's important to say this because in this major strategic touristic site for the Mexican economy, they've attained success in an orderly way. You see our forecast in absolute terms, and they even showed a lower activity, and they're showing a downward trend. Culiacan, Sinaloa, same trend. So this is a downward trend. Next, Tijuana, Baja California, again, showing a descending trend. You can see that predictions have a very stable behavior in most of them. We're going to see a couple examples where this is not the case, but we see that they reach the peak and then it starts descending. Technical warning here, we always consider the 7 last days as not so informative because there is a natural delay in the process of communicating data in terms of epidemiological surveillance. So there's like a gap or like a delay there. So I'm just taking into consideration from the peak to this part here. Veracruz, not yet. Veracruz is heading to their peak. This is critical because here is when we are going to define if they are going to show a downward trend or not yet. Oaxaca, here is where the prediction is not getting closer to the reality. There is a problem going on in Oaxaca concerning social mobility, and that is the determining factor. An additional piece of information about Oaxaca. This forecast was made for Oaxaca City and its relatively small urban area. Oaxaca is a very scattered state with a lot of geographic, social, and cultural diversity. And this, I lost the sound.
And other types of things.
gracias. Muy buenas tardes. Tengan todos ustedes. Saludo con afecto a mi buen amigo, el señor subsecretario de Salud, Hugo López Gatel, a nuestros buenos amigos también con quienes hemos estado trabajando recientemente en forma muy intensa, José Luis Alomía, y también a Ricardo Cortés, a todos ustedes, amigos, amigas de los medios de comunicación. Estamos en tiempos difíciles para México y para el mundo entero. Estamos ante una crisis sanitaria que ha impactado a muchos sectores productivos, entre ellos el turismo, una de las principales actividades económicas del país, con una aportación al Producto Interno Bruto de 8.7%. Al cierre del 2019 recibimos 45 millones 24 mil turistas internacionales, cuya derrama fue de 24.563 millones de dólares. Tanto en turismo como en divisas crecimos el 9%. El consumo turístico total, en el que se incluye el turismo extranjero y el nacional, es de la cifra de 173.509 millones de dólares, de los cuales el 83% corresponden al mercado nacional y
Of
17%
this,
a los
83% is national and 17% is international.
internacionales. Se ha impactado
According to this contingency, obviously the arrival of international tourists has been seriously impacted. We have seen a decrease, a significant decrease from last year,
Desde luego que para el
45% less
cifras
than last
del
year.
segundo trimestre, las cifras son
When we
mayores.
take a look at
En el
the
caso de
numbers
México,
from
son los
other
meses que más
years, we
se
can see
impactó
that the
por esta
tourism
situación.
industry is in a very
Por ello es
delicate
importante señalar
place.
que la actividad turística no solo
This is why
representa
it's important for us to let you know that tourism activity is essential to our
de
country, but
manera
also
simple
to our economy. And so we urgently need to reactivate this to avoid losing more jobs and feeling more serious effects. And we are right on board with the spotlights that the Ministry of Health has presented and that the president has signaled as being the highest authority during this contingency that we are living through. During this coronavirus health emergency, we've been working with many different people. We've been working with Deputy Secretary Gattel. We've been working on how to reactivate the tourism industry. The protocols, the two protocols that we talked about were, what are we going to do with people who are stuck in different places because they had been vacationing there? And we talked about that, and we considered that we would be putting a protocol into place to deal with that. The second protocol was how we were going to be reopening restaurants and hotels, different establishments within the tourism industry. Last, on May 2nd, during a reunion with the National Water Commission, which was attended by numerous ministers, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the Secretary of the Economy, we all, and many other secretaries, we formed a group to create health emergency guidelines so that we would be able to open the tourism sector in a staggered fashion. And I will be coordinating that as the Secretary of Tourism. And then the Secretary of Health and I have been working together on numerous protocols, and we are going to follow ones that have been established internationally. And especially, we're going to take a really close look at the ones that have been established in Canada and the United States. We'll also be working with the private sector. Mr. Dr. Lopez Gattel and myself got together this morning to speak about our work group. We got together with the secretaries from tourism from numerous states in Mexico. and they agreed that they would send a summary of that work group. In that meeting, we also had Deputy Secretary of Transportation, Carlos Moran Muguel, as well as the presidents of the National Council for Tourism and Business and the Servitour Conaco. We also had our friends Braulio and Lopez Campos there with us. Over the last few days, we can see that the tourism represents quite a significant number of our national GDP. We have the states of Baja California, as well as Baja California Sur, Mexico City, Colima, Nayarit, Quintana Roo, Sinaloa, Jalisco, who were participating there. I want to say thank you so much for your work to my deputy secretaries and also to the general directors for who are part of Deputy Secretary Gattel's team, so that we've been able to get to. Thank you so much for your help in getting this protocol together. It's clear that you have great solidarity, all of you, and that you're very concerned with the tourism sector. Before I talk about a little bit more about what this 100-page document, it really speaks very much, goes very much into detail about protocols at airports and to everywhere out from there that you can imagine. I'm going to go into it a little bit, but it is that long 100-page document. And this is how we really got into the nitty gritty of those protocols. I do have some good news before we start on that. This afternoon, I talked to the President of the Republic of Mexico, and in order to pick up internal tourism again within Mexico, we're going to keep long weekends. So, just to give you an idea of what we're talking about here, we're talking about increasing occupancy rates at hotels by 7 to 8 points. We're talking about all kinds of people who stay at hotels, and this boosts tourism activity. And then we have 5 million additional tourists who usually travel from all the way, all around Mexico, all to the magic towns. And this represents millions of pesos of money that goes to the tourism sector. What the upper echelons of business leaders have proposed to us is that our beautiful and wonderful country will get through this. This is very challenging. There are many adversities, but we will get through this. And during times of austerity, that's when we get the most creative. We are going to get through this. We're going to get through it well. And we, are going to see how well we come out of this. Of the 14 million or more dollars that are for the tourism industry and spent there, we're going to get back to that. And that activity is going to get ramped up again. So let's hear a little bit about what's in that document. Thank you very much, Secretary. I would also like to ask Dr. Alcala if he could present the work that we have done with the Secretary of Tourism and his team. Thank you so much. I'd love to, Secretary, Deputy Secretary, Secretary, Dr. Alomia, and everyone watching us at home. This document that Secretary Torruco was presenting, this really has many chapters. This is quite a body of work among the government, between the government and society and business people who work in the tourism sector. One priority to get back to the new normal, in order to go back to a healthy economy that also really takes into account public health, we're going to need to follow the protocols in this document. We've talked to you about this stoplight. That's the best tool that we have right now to know what kind of activities are people going to be able to start up again in different states.
El semáforo regional o semáforo estatal tiene cuatro niveles: verde, que
The
es la
regional
normalidad
spotlight,
total,
the state
con las
spotlight, they
actividades a
both
las que
have four
regularmente no
levels. We
estábamos
have
acostumbrados,
totally normal,
como el
that's
estornudo de
green.
etiqueta, el lavado
And we
constante
can
de manos y
see
sobre
here
todo
talking
el
to us
quedarse en
about
casa si
how we
uno
must
está
continue to sneeze
enfermo.
into our
El
elbows,
semáforo
wash
amarillo
our
es
hands
en
in the
donde las
proper
actividades
manner, and
laborales
stay at
tienen
home.
un flujo
The
regular.
yellow
Sin embargo, el
spotlight
aforo en
shows us
espacios
that there
públicos
is
está
activity,
disminuido
economic
en un
activity going,
porcentaje que se
but
está
there is reduced
determinando para poder
capacity
tener este
allowed in
distanciamiento
public, in
social, esta
open spaces,
distancia
as well
mínima de
as
metro y
closed
medio que
spaces
hemos
and with
hablado
more
desde que
restrictions.
se
We have a
implementó
1.5-meter
la Jornada
minimum
Nacional de
safe
Sana Distancia,
distancing
y a partir de
measurement,
ahí
and
las
that's according to our
actividades en
national
relación
safe
a
distancing
las
campaign.
actividades se consideran esenciales.
We
El
have
resto se
activities in
disminuye
orange,
a
active
solamente
economic
dentro
activities
de
that are
sus
considered to
empresas
be
las
essential,
actividades
can be
prioritarias
carried
para no
out at
tener
that
que
time.
detener toda la
People can
actividad.
also be
Y cuando
working
llega
within
al
their
nivel rojo,
companies
el semáforo
on
entonces ya
priority
están
activities
encontrándose
so
los
that they don't
resultados en este
ramp up
momento
totally, but
con
they
la
do have
Jornada
some
Nacional de Sana
activity that's
Distancia.
starting again.
Al
And then we have
100%
red, which is where
solamente
we're at
las
right
actividades
now
esenciales
during our
van a
national safe
funcionar.
distancing campaign. Only
El sector
essential
turístico,
activities
entre
can
otros,
be in
tiene
action right
múltiples
now. In terms of
diferentes
our tourism
actividades.
sector,
Transporte
we
aéreo,
have
terrestre,
numerous different
hotelería,
activities. We
restaurantes,
have
destinos,
air
cruceros.
transportation,
Es un
hotels,
mundo muy, muy
restaurants,
grande, y por eso
cruises,
lo que dice el
aquatic
secretario
parks. This
Corrupto
is
es tan
really
correcto,
a
de tener
massive
un
umbrella
reglamento
that
muy
covers so
específico para cada
much.
una de las
So the
actividades. Se
secretary was
resultó
very
en
right to have
un
a document
documento
that is so
extenso
specific that
de
talks
más de
about
130
each and every
páginas, en donde
activity and
detallamos
how
cada
we
una de
are
estas
going to be
actividades, cómo hay que
ramping it or
llevarlas
not
con
ramping it
esta
back
nueva
up.
normalidad, cómo es que hay que llegar,
This also is
aplicar
going to
los
tell us
filtros
how we're going to be acting
sanitarios,
under this
las tiene
new
por favor,
normal,
aplicar
how we're going to have health filters,
especificidades
and
que
how we
deben de
are
llevar
going
todas
to
las
apply
actividades
specific
turísticas
types of
sin
actions
importar el
that
giro
every
de la
single
empresa. La
person must
siguiente, por
take
favor.
within the tourism
Y
sector
estas son como las
without
básicas:
regard to whether it's a
garantizar
restaurant,
la sana
beach, or
distancia,
whatever.
limpieza y
Here are the
desinfección de
basic
objetos y superficies de uso común,
activities, the
el lavado
mitigation
correcto y
members. We need
constante
to
de manos,
disinfect
los filtros que hemos
surfaces. We
comentado
need
ya,
to have
filtros
a
sanitarios
national,
de
we have to
entrada
have the safe
a lugares
distancing going on. We need
de
health
labores o
filters when we
lugares
go
cerrados,
into a
como aquí
place
seguramente
for
al
people
entrar
who are going
ustedes
to
les
work there
aplican
or when they
gel
leave. We also
antibacterial
have
para que
to
entren ya con
train
sus manos
people. Everyone has to
limpias.
put on
Hay que
sanitizing
capacitar al
gel,
personal de todas
for
las empresas
example, make sure
sobre
their hands
cómo
are
es la
clean.
nueva forma de
Clean.
abordar a
We
los
also need
clientes,
to
cómo
train
atenderlos
everyone who's working at
desde el
these
mostrador,
locations that are
cómo el
open. How
mostrador
are they
hay que
going to
estar
be dealing with
constantemente
people who come
haciendo
into their
higiene para
businesses?
que no esté
For example,
contaminado
at
de
the
cualquiera
welcome
de las,
area, we need to be constantly
digamos, secreciones que
sanitizing that
estamos
surface because so many
cuando
new people
hablamos,
are
cuando
there. We
intercambiamos
don't want to
palabras,
have
estamos
any
escupiendo pequeñas
secretions that
gotas de
come
saliva y
out of
hay
our
que
mouths
estarlo
when we're
limpiando.
speaking.
En este
We're
momento,
spitting out little
mis gotas de
droplets of
saliva están cayendo
saliva.
aquí
So
y
we
están
want to
cayendo
make
en este
sure we're
micrófono. Hay que
constantly
limpiarlo una
cleaning that
vez
up. For
cada
example, right now, my saliva drops are going right
semanal.
onto this microphone and right here, right in front of
Aislamiento,
me.
esto es muy
So we're going to have to
importante. Hay
clean
una
this
cultura
right after I'm
laboral en
done
nuestro
talking.
país en el que uno, cuando está
Isolation.
enfermo,
We
por
have
miedo
a
a
work
que
culture at our
pudieran
country where
tener
when people
repercusiones
are sick
negativas en nuestro trabajo, a
and
veces
they're
acudimos
worried that they're going
enfermos
to
a
have a
trabajar. Entonces, lo que hay
negative,
que hacer es
they're going to have
garantizar que
a
esos empleados
reprimand, they're going to be
acudan a recibir
negatively
muestras
reprimanded at their
en
work
capacidad
because they're
y
sick and they can't go into
tener,
work. And we need to
ejercer
change
ese
that
derecho que
culture.
tenemos
We need
y
them to
poder
say, no, I
quedarnos en
actually
casa
am
a
sick, and
recuperarnos
my
de ello
right
sin
is to
estar
say that I need to stay home and get better
contaminando o
without
contagiando
being
o rompiendo
reprimanded
las cadenas de
by my
transmisión
employer, so
por
that I'm not going to
miedo
be
a perder nuestro
spreading
trabajo. Hay que cambiar
contagion
esa cultura.
or
Tenemos derecho a las
elevating the
incapacidades y
transmission
hay que
rates
ejercerlas en
because I'm
todos los
sick, but I'm
sectores.
too scared to actually say that I'm sick. So
Los rubros que
we do need
destacamos
to
para cada
change that
empresa
culture,
turística
that work
es
culture
las
in
áreas
every
de más
sector.
importancia para realizar limpieza y
Here's what we
desinfección,
have
como son los
underlined for
mostradores
each
o las
tourism
mesas en
company.
los
The most
restaurantes,
important thing
las
is
medidas
to
de prevención, medidas
disinfect
para incorporar a la
everything
personal
at
poco a poco
places
una vez
where
que
the
se
public is
regrese a
arriving
las
to. So
actividades
wiping down
habituales. Cómo
all those
ofrecer el
tables at
servicio
restaurants,
al cliente
example.
y las acciones de
We also
comunicación
want
con
to
sus
know, how
empleados,
are people
cómo
going to be
externos a
attended
los
to?
clientes para que sepan cuál es
how
el
is that
nuevo
going to
modo
happen?
de,
This has to be internally
vivir, cómo hay
communicated
que
to
hacer
employees and
filas
also
con una
externally
sana
to clients
distancia
who
de al
come
menos
in.
metro y medio,
We're going to have to
independientemente
line up,
de la
and we're going
situación
to
en la que
have
uno se
for
encuentre.
example, when we're in a line, we're lining up, we're going
En el
to have
transporte aéreo, por
1.5
ejemplo,
meters
los
between
mostradores que
us.
estamos hablando,
In
las
terms of
áreas de
air
tránsito de
travel
los
and
aeropuertos deben de
transportation,
tener también flujos
places
específicos
where people are
para
going through constantly
controlar
transit
esta
areas in
circulación
airports, we're going
frecuente
to
para que
need
tengamos que
specific flows
ir
in
de
one
un lado hacia
direction
un
and
sentido
another so
y de
that we're
otro lado
not
hacia otro
mixing
sentido.
people all
Eso
together. We're
en
going
el
to
metro,
have people going
dicho sea de
only
paso, en el
one
metro
way
está
on
bien
one
establecido
side and the
y
other
no
way on the other
respetamos.
side. For
Hay que
example,
respetarlo,
in the
hay que
metro, in the
aprender a respetar.
subway,
Hay un
we're
carril
going to
para
have
unos
to be doing
hacia
that,
un
and we're going to
lado
have
y
to
un carril
respect it,
para
and we're
ir
going to
hacia el
have
otro
to
lado.
learn to
Entonces
respect that. We're
es
going to have a lane
como las
to
calles,
go one
no,
way and
no
another
tomamos
lane that comes back the other
cualquier
way.
calle
It's
y el
just like
sentido que se nos
on
dé
the
la gana.
street.
Hay que
We're
circular por
not
la
going to be able
derecha
to
y así
just
es como
go
también
down
hay que
whatever
aprender a
street just like
hacerlo.
when
El
we're driving. You
procesamiento
have to
y la
stay on the right, you have
planificación
to stay
de
on the
los
left, and you have
trámites
to learn
son
how
como
to
cuando
do
dicen,
it. This
yo
is the
tengo mi
approach
rodaje de
that we're
grupo y
taking,
ahí vamos
and
todos
this
y
is what we need people
rodamos
to
y
learn how to
hacemos
do. We're going to
grupitos.
have
Entonces hay que
group
aprender
one,
a
like when we're on an
respetar la
airplane, they say
distancia.
group one, it's your
Asimismo,
time to board.
en este
And we're going to have to
proceso
do
del
that with safe
transporte aéreo, por
distancing between
ejemplo,
us.
el
And
personal
we've learned to do
metropolitano
that normally to
está
get on airplanes, and
encargado
we're going to have
de
to learn to do it with safe distancing.
nuestra seguridad en la
And then we
aeronave
have
y
our
esto
people who
incluye
are
y
on
siempre ha
board the
incluido
flights, our
la seguridad
our flight
sanitaria. Si
attendants,
alguien se
and we're
siente
going to
mal
have to pay
durante
more
su
attention to them. They
viaje,
have
durante su vuelo,
always
hay que
been
reportarlo con el
emphasizing health,
personal de sobrecargo,
safety, and
mismo que va a reportarlo con el capitán para
sanitization.
que estén
So
listos en tierra
those
para
people are
recibir
also
a las
going to be
personas
making sure
destinadas y
that people
síntomas de
are
cualquier
paying attention to
enfermedad.
this, or
La
for
siguiente,
example,
por
if they
favor.
see someone who's
Sanitización
exhibiting
es
symptoms, they're going to
importante.
tell
Después de cada viaje hay
the
que limpiar.
pilot
Sí,
and
dije
the
la siguiente
crew as
porque hay
soon
que
as
hacer lo
they
mismo en
arrive.
transporte terrestre.
It's
Las
important to
centrales de
disinfect
autobuses
everything
en
in the
vacaciones
airports.
son verdaderos
It's
campos de
important
cultivo,
to
no solo para el
disinfect the
coronavirus, sino
bus
para influenza, si
terminals.
es
These are areas that
temporada de
are
influenza que se
real areas
acerca
for
en un futuro
transmitting
en Estados
influenza,
Unidos
for
y
flu.
para
It's
otro
not
tipo
just
de
about COVID.
enfermedades. Hay que
So we
estar
need to be
constantemente
sanitizing these
limpiando y
areas
desinfectando
constantly. We have to be
los
cleaning and
autobuses,
disinfecting
las aeronaves por
all the
dentro
time.
después
We
de
have
cada
to be
viaje
doing that for
para que el
buses,
siguiente pasajero
for
pueda subirse
flights,
y pueda
for
hacerlo con toda la
airplanes. This is to
conciencia.
make sure
Por
that
favor.
the next passenger who comes in
Los
can
hoteles
come
tenemos que
on and not be
aprender
worried
a
about getting sick.
convivir ahora de forma
Hotels,
diferente en
we
el
have to
lobby, en las
learn
albercas,
to
el
live in a
personal
different way now in the
que nos
lobby,
atiende, el
in
personal que está en la
swimming
nave, nos
pools,
atiende, nos
in
lleva alimentos,
people
nos lleva
who are
bebidas, deberán de
employees
portar un
who are so
cubreboca, por
lovelily
ejemplo, para
attending
no
us
estar
in such a nice way.
contaminando
They're going to have
potencialmente
face
lo que nos
masks,
está
for
llevando, lo que
example,
nos
from
está
now on,
sirviendo.
so that they're not potentially
Restaurantes, bares,
contaminating the
habitaciones, hay que
food
hacer
that they're
mejor
serving to us.
limpieza
In
y más
restaurants,
profunda cada vez
bars,
que
in
hay un cambio
rooms,
de
we're going
huésped
to
o de
have a
familia. La
deeper
siguiente, por
cleaning
favor.
system going on there for every time they
Los destinos de
change
sol y playa,
guests.
hay que hacer una mejor gestión ambiental y mejor
For
educación
people who are
ambiental
headed to the
en
beach, we need to
el
focus
ambiente
more on
turístico
environmental
y
education and
mejorar la
environmental
calidad del agua
protection.
y la seguridad de todos los
We need
servicios que
to
los hoteles
improve
reciben.
water quality and
Finalmente,
security and
tal vez
safety
en la
for
cocina
services that are
también hay
offered.
que mejorar
And now, finally,
muchas cosas,
restaurants.
hay
In
que
the
cambiar
kitchen,
muchas
we
culturas.
have to
De repente,
improve a
los
lot of things. We
bufetes
have to
y
change a lot
barras
of
de
our
alimentos
cultural
no tienen una
habits,
protección
especially
y uno
for
va caminando
buffets and
sirviéndose
food
la
bars. Those usually
ensalada
don't have
y
any
platicando con el
protection.
amigo
So people are serving
o
their salad and they're
literalmente
talking with their
escupiéndole
friend
a la comida
and
que se va a servir el
literally,
siguiente.
literally
Entonces hay que
spitting
cambiar
on the
todo esto,
food that they're going to
hay
be
que ir
serving to the next person. We have
sirviéndose
to
los
change all of
alimentos
that.
probablemente sin hablar
We
y
have to
solicitar a
serve
los
our
restaurantes que
food
pongan
just without speaking to each other
acrílicos
and
o vidrios que
asking
protejan
restaurants to also
de
put
esta
acrylic
de
or
este hablar, de
glass that
esta
can
saliva
protect
a
from
los
this
alimentos que están
spittle
ahí a
that
punto
is
de
coming out of
servirse.
people's
Y
mouths when they're
finalmente, la sana
speaking.
distancia entre los comensales y sobre
And
todo de acuerdo
finally,
al
safe
nivel
distancing
de
among people
alerta
who are going to
en el que esté
restaurants.
su estado de la
We
República
have to
en
be
este nuevo
on high
semáforo, en
alert
donde
and make sure
cuando
you
transitemos
know
de verde
what
a
state
amarillo,
you're
el aforo en
in
los
when you
restaurantes
obviously
tendrá
you know
que
what state you're in, but you
disminuirse.
want to say
Cuando pase a
exactly what
naranja también tendrá
light
que
on the
disminuirse
stoplight, what
mes
color of the
a un
stoplight
y
am
esto
I is my state
para
on?
toda
So
la
if it's
industria
orange,
turística. Muchísimas
you have to
gracias.
understand what that implies. And this is for the
Perfecto.
whole
Muy
tourism
bien.
industry.
Pues gracias nuevamente,
Excellent.
secretario
Thank you.
Torruco.
Thank
Gracias,
you
doctor Ricardo
again,
Cortés.
Secretary. Thank you,
Quisiera
Secretary
pasar a la
Torruco.
sesión de preguntas y
Thank you,
respuestas.
Dr. Ricardo
Eh,
Cortés. Let's go to
Quedan
Q&A.
dos o tres temas bien claros. El primero
I
es, como
want
se ha
to
señalado,
make two or
no
three things
podemos
very clear.
estar
The first
ni
thing, which we have
México ni cualquier
indicated
otro país
numerous
en un
times,
estado
not Mexico,
especial, en un
not
estado de
any country
reducción como el que
can
estamos de
be
manera eterna.
in a
Esta es la
state
realidad que todos
of
los países
paralysis that we're
confrontamos.
in right now for
Y esto de
a long
ninguna
time.
manera
This is the
debe
reality that all
interpretarse como
countries
que
are
se descuide
facing.
un lado o se descuide el otro.
So,
Hemos hablado
in
con toda
some
claridad
way, we
en México
see
y en
if
muchos
you drop
países
one
que hay dos
side
bienes públicos
of what you're
generalmente
holding, then the
protegidos:
other side's going to
la
drop
salud,
too.
la vida y
So, the
obviamente
general
todo lo que se
public
hereda,
good, which is
y
health and
el
life, is
bienestar
what
y la
everyone
economía,
wants to
que a su
take
vez
care of.
son
And then we
elementos
have
de los que
the
dependen
economy
la
and
salud y la
its
vida.
own well
Entonces,
being.
por eso tenemos que encontrar un
And
equilibrio
the
preciso.
economy
Lo
depends
segundo,
on
como se
our
muestra
healthy
claramente en las palabras
status.
del
So we
secretario
can't
Torruco y en
separate
las
these two.
precisiones
The second
técnicas que
point
hizo el
that
doctor Ricardo
Secretary
Cortés,
Torruco made very
se
clear, and
aprecia la
also as Dr.
necesidad de
Cortés
transitar
further
a una
elucidated
nueva
on,
normalidad. Es decir, no es
we
volver a
need to
lo
transition to a
acostumbrado,
new
sino es
normal. It's
encontrar
not about
todas las
going back to what
oportunidades
we're
para
used
cambiar
to.
nuestro
It's about
comportamiento en el espacio
finding
público,
new
no
opportunities
solamente
and
como
taking
individuos,
them
sino
to
como
change how we
colectividad,
live
con
under
unos
this new
son
normal and how we're going
elementos
to
que se
act in
cambian
public.
estructural
And we
o
have to do this
físicamente
as
y
a
otros son
group.
de la manera
These
en
are
que
going to
nos
be
comportamos
structural
como
changes,
colectivo
and
en
then
los
other
espacios
changes are going to
públicos.
be about our
Y aquí, dicho sea de
behavior
paso,
and how we behave
iremos orientando,
collectively
como ya
in
lo
public.
hicimos para los elementos iniciales de la nueva
As we have
normalidad,
been
junto con las
commenting,
secretarias de
for example, when we were
Economía,
telling
de
you about the
Trabajo y
new
el director
normal
del IMSS,
before, talking with
existen
the
muchos elementos de
secretaries of
interacción
labor,
con
the
otros
director of the
sectores. En
Mexican
el caso
Social
concreto del
Security
crédito
Institute,
FUCA, se ve
and
la
the
interacción
secretary of the
del sector
economy. And we were
turístico
seeing how there's a
con
lot of
salud, pero también el sector
transmission
transporte. Y por
of
eso también nuestro
how things work
agradecimiento
between
al
all these
secretario
sectors.
ingeniero
So they're
Julián
really
Espriu y
interconnected.
sus
The
subsecretarios que han
transportation
estado
sector
también muy cercanos
with
a
the
este
economy, with
grupo de
labor,
trabajo, este
all
otro
of
grupo de
these
trabajo.
deputy
Aquí hay otra
secretaries and
interacción que
secretaries
próximamente
have been working
comentaremos,
very
que es
closely in
la
this
de
work
los
group.
recintos
We will
turísticos
tell you more
que
about that
tienen
very
connotación
soon.
cultural.
And that's about
Y nuestra muy querida
tourism
secretaria
locations that
Alejandra
have a
Frausto está
cultural
también trabajando en su parte
part
y en su
to them.
momento haremos
And
la presentación
our
conjunta
dear
de
Alejandra
dónde
Frausto is
converge la
working on
actividad
that, and
turística con
she
la actividad
will
cultural y por
present
supuesto
to
en
us
extensión
on
nuestra vida
how
cultural
tourism
con otros
activity and
aspectos de la
cultural
vida pública.
activity
Todo un
overlap with each
mosaico.
other.
Lo último que quiero dejar
She'll
en
also be
claro
referring
es que
to general public
tenemos
activity
total
with those as
conciencia y
well.
por supuesto
What I want
nuestra
to be very
absoluta
clear about is
empatía
that we are
con la
very
sociedad,
aware,
los,
and we want everyone to
las
know that
personas que
our
en este momento
empathy
visualizan
goes
otras
out to
realidades
people
en el
who
día
right
a día.
now
Y quiero
are
destacar
looking
en
at a
particular,
different
por un lado,
reality
las
day by day.
personas que tienen
And
familiares
I want to
enfermos en
highlight
este momento,
specifically
particularmente quienes
people who
están
have family
hospitalizados
members
y
who are
aún más
sick
en
right
condición
now,
crítica,
who are in the hospital,
que viven
and
otra
others whose
perspectiva,
family
porque en este
members are in
momento lo
critical
que ven es una
condition.
situación
These
muy
people are living a
angustiante,
different
muy
reality.
preocupante.
What they see right
Y
now
también
is
el
pure
personal de salud,
anguish, pure
que
worry.
día a día, particularmente
And
los hospitales que
healthcare
están sometidos a
professionals
una enorme presión,
daily,
una enorme demanda,
particularly
y estoy haciendo
hospitals
un trabajo
that
que
are
siempre
put
hemos
under this
calificado
incredible
de
pressure
heroico.
and this incredible
Personal de salud está
demand,
tratando de salvar vidas
and
de
we
familiares,
are going to
personas
call them
fallecidas.
heroic.
Entonces,
They're trying to
esto
save
nunca se nos debe
lives who
perder
people
de
need
vista,
them
y
right
todos los
now.
días,
We
mientras
never
está
have
en
to
proceso todo lo demás,
lose sight of
esto
this.
está presente.
Every
Y
single
no
day,
debemos perder
while
de vista
everything
que
else, while the
esto
wheels are
será
starting to
cuidado
churn
en
with
cada
everything
minuto
else, we
hasta el
can't
final
lose
del
sight
periodo
of
epidémico, no
taking
solo
care
este
of these
inicial,
healthcare
sino
professionals
los
and
posibles
having
elementos
empathy
que
with
vengan
people
después.
whose family members are sick.
Pero a nivel de gobierno
So
tenemos que
there's
ver
stuff that's coming after,
integralmente a
but
toda
let's
la
not lose
sociedad y a toda la
sight
comunidad
of that
nacional. Y en
importance.
su momento tenemos que
We have to
tendernos,
also think
involucrar
about
a
this new normal
toda
that is
la nación,
national.
todo el Estado
And we
nacional,
have to
en
involve
elementos que ya se
everyone, the
tienen que
whole
planear,
nation,
en
the
elementos que en su
whole
momento
nation
serán
state.
instrumentados
There are things
sin
that we
perder
have
de
to
vista
plan.
estas
And that at one point in
elementos del día a
time,
día.
those things will be
Entonces, esa es la
important at that
perspectiva y
time.
así lo
But
vamos a seguir
let's not lose
trabajando
sight
con
of
total
daily what
apertura
people are
y que no
dealing
se
with the
malinterprete
pandemic.
como que ya
Let's
terminó la Jornada
not
Nacional
misinterpret
de Sana Distancia porque no
people
terminó. Nos
thinking that the
quedan
national safe
12 al
distancing
incluso
campaign
unos
has
días
ended. It
para
has not
quedarnos en
ended.
casa
We
y en la
still
medida
have
en que
12
logremos
very, very important
aprovechar
days to stay at home.
esos 12 días con una
and
gran disciplina
we
para
want to
poder tener una
use those 12 days as best we can. We need to be disciplined, and that's going to give us a better opportunity to transition to that new normal and not have to stretch out restrictory message. Let's go to restrictory measures. Let's go to Q&A. You, I think you from yesterday, you, and then Bianca. Thank you, doctor. I'd like to ask you, Mr. Secretary of Tourism, are hotels going to reserve the right to admit people or not? Because we've seen that some people, when we go out into the street, we can see that they're using face masks. Other people are following the mitigation members, others aren't. So will the hotel where they're going to stay, will they reserve the right to admit people or not according to what they think is right? And what about the people who are at restaurants? Are they in that 100-page report that you mentioned? And when are we going to have the first long weekend? And will it be staggered? If we are going to only know which stoplight by state, how do we know who gets to travel? The first long weekend is November 20th. This is the last of the 3 annual long weekends. So we want you to know that that's not canceled. We want hotel workers to know that there still is going to be internal tourism. That represents 82% of the tourism industry. And then the magic towns will know very far ahead of time if they can negotiate with travel agents and sports groups for packages that they in order to go there to visit those places. We also have another very important campaign on social media. We have our information portal Visit Mexico, and more than 6 million users visit that website. I'd like to remind you that 58% of consolidating purchasing power is by way of social media. That was before the pandemic, because there's a before and after. We have to take a look at what is the tourist's profile. After people have been confined for so long, we are thinking, after seeing all the information on Google, we've seen that more people are starting to take a look at trips online. So of course, it's going to go up from 58% to 70%. And this is people who are buying trips through social media platforms. We are going to aggressively work on understanding and getting answers here. We have one of the best companies that for 5 years was number one in Mexico, Apple Worldwide. And these people represent 36 different countries. And these are this company has taken a look at it each 5 years. How does the tourism industry deal with a crisis? So this campaign is hand in hand with the tourism industry and sector, and we want to see what programs are going to be put into play, what programs are going to start up. This is going to help us understand what packages are going to be available for tourists, and we're going to meet with representatives in all states to talk about how we're going to work on this. For example, in Mexico, we have the Enjoy Mexico program. We have 148 different suppliers who work with this group, and that's how we positioned this city as being the highest on the rank of having their hotels full in the whole country. In 2016, in July, we had a lot of support from many suppliers. What was your other question?
Hotels always have their own policies. Before or after the pandemic, they will be all welcome. Of course, abiding by the requirements stated by the Ministry of Health, and there are going to be protocols for each one of the areas. We're talking about more than 25 sectors that are part of the touristic activity in Mexico, including water parks and golf courts. Everything is included in the package. That's why it's 140 pages long.
¿Qué tal,
Carlos,
doctor,
thank you very much.
secretario?
Hello, Doctor and
Buenas tardes. Carlos Guzmán de
Deputy
Farmacéutica. Una pregunta
Secretaries.
rápida. Una para el secretario de Turismo. Esta
Two very quick
decisión se toma
questions.
actualmente
One
del
for the
presidente de
Minister of
cancelar esta
Tourism.
decisión que
This
tenía
decision
de suspender
from
fiestas,
the
largos
President
fines
of
de semana.
canceling or
¿Es una
suspending
información de
long
la recuperación que se estima
bank
se tenga para
holidays.
el sector
Is
turístico
this a
después de la
permanent
pandemia de coronavirus?
measure,
Y una segunda
or
pregunta.
this is just
Estamos hablando
a
de un antes
measure
y
taken
después,
after
desde
the
luego,
coronavirus
este tipo
pandemic?
de
We're
acción
talking before
fortalece
and an after. Of
el
course,
detonar
this
el
type of
aparato
actions
productivo, hace
um,
generar
trigger
riqueza y
the
sobre todo a través
productive
de las corrientes
uh,
turísticas
apparatus. We
representa,
need to
como le estaba
generate
diciendo,
wealth, and the
el
touristic sector
consumo del turista
represents
nacional, pues es
a very
supera
important
los
fraction
124 mil
of economic
millones de
activity in
dólares,
Mexico.
es el
It
82%
surpasses the
total y
$124 billion,
85% de la ocupación hotelera
and
nacional.
it
Yo
accounts
recuerdo
for
cuando era presidente
85%
de la
of
Federación Canadiense de
hotel
Turismo,
occupancy. I
decíamos
remember when
íbamos a
I
los
was the
diferentes
president
foros
to the
que en
Hotel
las buenas y en las malas
Association. I
siempre
would tell them that
sale a flote el turismo
in
interno,
through
el
thin
poderío
and
del
through
turismo
thick,
interno es el que ha
domestic
salvado muchos
tourism
negocios. Por
always
ello, vamos
keeps
a
us
hacer
afloat.
una gran
That's
convocatoria
why
y les
we're
pido nos echen
going
la mano
to
para que
call
no
for
esperemos
everyone, and
el
please
otro
help
año y
us with
viajemos
this,
todos por
so that
México.
this year
El
and the
que tenía
next year,
pensado hacer
let's
un viaje al
all
extranjero,
travel
que lo
Mexico.
gaste a todos los
Those of you
niveles
who were planning
socioeconómicos.
to travel
Vamos a
abroad,
levantar en nuestro país
change your
no
mind
tanto
and
nuestro
travel
territorio,
through
que
Mexico.
además es
Uh,
hermoso desde
or
las
Mexican
montañas
territory is
nevadas hasta
beautiful,
las
from
selvas
the
tropicales.
snowy
Así que, y
mountains
en
down
cada
to the
viaje, y
tropical
también a ustedes les pido,
rainforests.
compremos una
And
artesanía
with
para hacerle
every
el día
travel
a las
you
familias
make,
artesanas que
buy a
le vienen a
handicraft,
visitar.
so that you can
¿De qué manera
support the
viaje
magical
estratégico
hands
que se
of
tiene es
Mexican
permanente? ¿Es permanente la
handcrafts,
decisión ya de varios meses
craftsmen,
atrás
sorry.
del presidente
And
de tomar
so
los fines de
this,
semana
is it a
largos?
permanent
Ya
decision
hablé
of
con él en la
Bueno,
mañana, él
postponing
está de
the
acuerdo
long
en que
weekends? I
se
spoke to the
siga
president
como
in the
nueva
morning, and he
ruta que
agrees that
marcará
we
la Ley Federal del
continue.
Trabajo, porque
We
esta ley,
won't
le
modify
recuerdo
the
que
Federal
la
Labor
propuso en el
Act,
año de
because let me remind
1999,
you that the
luego
proposal
pasó,
came up
luego en el
in
2001,
May
el precedente de la Asociación de
1999,
Balnearios
and then in
fue el
2001
que
the
a
president
través
of the Water
de,
Park
también con
Association
su
was the
vicepresidenta,
person
hoy secretaria
who,
triunvadora,
along his
eh,
vice president,
se
the
nos
current
unó para apoyarlos, para
Minister of
sacar adelante
Tourism
los
in the
fines
state
de
of
semana.
Morelos,
Fue una
they
labor
both
de todos los
uh,
prestadores de servicios
pushed
y fue
so we could
gracias
have
a la
long
Comisión de
weekends in
Turismo que se
Mexico.
aprobó
And it was
esa
thanks to the
reforma a la Ley Federal
Commission on
para
Tourism
permitir
that,
esos
that
fines de
we had
semana largos
approval to
que
the
tanto han
Federal
dejado
Labor Act
derrame
to
económico.
have
Pero no
long
vamos a
weekends.
abandonar
Long
los
weekends are
festejos de la
an
Constitución, los
important
festejos del
economic
aniversario
drive
de
in
Benito
this
Juárez.
country.
Vamos a
Let's not forget
ponernos
about
en
other
contacto con la
celebrations like the
Secretaría de
anniversary
Educación
of
para que hagamos
Benito
programas
Juarez.
especiales que
Let's work hand
complementen
in hand
la
with the
cultura en
Ministry of
este viaje que
Education, for
hacemos todos por
example,
nuestro país,
to
para que
craft
estemos en
and
la artesanía
devise
mexicana.
plans
Si
to
ustedes tienen
support
un
culture
llamado,
in our country,
ven en artesanía
support
mexicana y verán que la Unión de
craftsmen
California es
from
artesanía
Mexico. If
por todos.
you
Y el
have to
turismo
make
interno
a
y
gift
también el
to
turismo
somebody,
extranjero.
give a Mexican
Tenemos también
handicraft.
una
As
excelente
for
novedad
foreign
que
tourism,
una
let me
reciente
announce something. A
encuesta que hizo
recent
una empresa internacional de gran
survey
importancia
made by an
resulta que en
international
el perfil
company,
del
a
turista, del
very
canadiense
well-known
y del
one, turns
estadounidense
out the touristic
está en su
profile of
mente viajar a
Canadian and
México tan
American
pronto
tourists
se
who are
permita esto
planning
de
to
las
visit
autoridades
Mexico.
de
They
aquellos
say
países,
they have
porque no
stated
van
that
a
they're planning
viajar
to visit
más de
Mexico as soon
cuatro
as they
horas y media
can,
de vuelo. Es
because
como el turismo
they
interno, no van
can't
a
or
viajar
they
más de 5 horas.
won't like
Hemos
to
analizado el
travel for
perfil
more
o
than
el
four
nuevo
hours.
perfil del
And
turista
we've
y lo
analyzed
estamos
the new
adaptando así
profile
como
of
lo
the
dice la
tourist,
academia.
and we are
Marketing
adapting
turístico,
just as
satisfacer
it is
necesidades y
mandated
expectativas del
in
consumidor.
the by
Señor doctor,
touristic
el
marketing.
día
We
de hoy
are
se da a conocer por parte de la jefa de gobierno,
adapting
Claudia Sheinbaum, esta
and
plan
wants
de
of the
desconfinamiento, como le dicen
consumer.
en España, de
According
regreso a la
to
nueva
Claudia
normalidad
Sheinbaum,
para
the
la ciudad capital. ¿Qué es lo que el
deconfinement
gobierno
plan
relaciona con
or
ella?
the
Habla de
reopening
puntos
for Mexico
importantes.
City
Me
and its
gustaría,
urban area.
hablando de
Important
industria
points are
cultural,
mentioned
industria del
here,
turismo,
but talking
también industria
about
es el fútbol. ¿Cómo se
industries
ven todos
like
estos? ¿Se nos
tourism,
podría
another big
contextualizar un poco
industry
cuál es el
is
acercamiento que se
football
tiene ya con la Liga
that
MX,
draws a
con
lot
la
of
Federación Mexicana
people.
de Fútbol, la de
So, what
béisbol,
about the MX
respecto
League and
a
the
la
Mexican
reapertura? Cuando nos
Federation, the
avienta hoy el
Mexican
presidente de
League
la
and the
jefa de
Mexican
gobierno que la
Federation
felicitaba
and the
como
Baseball
ejecutaba con usted
Federation?
y con las autoridades
Claudia
también del Estado de
Sheinbaum
México. ¿Se
said that
esperaría que
she
sea
spoke with you and some other authorities from the state of Mexico. So as of July, big uh,
quiero crear
sports events will
expectativas de
resume.
espera,
What
pero
can you
el
tell us
viernes ya
about it?
podemos
I
conocer todos
don't
los
want to
pasos que
create any
vamos a organizar para el
expectation, but
nuevo
on Friday we're
CDMX
going to
y
have
vamos a hablar en
Claudia
detalle
Sheinbaum
precisamente de
here, and
el
we're
plan
going to elaborate in
de
more
tránsito, no
detail
regreso,
about that
es tránsito hacia
transit
adelante,
plan. It's not
hacia la nueva normalidad
a
en este
going
país,
back,
pero
it's
vamos a
not
hablar
a
en detalle de eso.
reopening
Incluye
completely, but
el
it's
tema
a
deportivo,
new normal
solo
plan.
una
It
pequeña
includes, of
referencia.
course, a
Hemos tenido
sports
también
bracket.
perfecta coordinación con la Liga
We've had
MX, con la Liga de
coordination with
Fútbol,
the
desde el
MX
inicio,
League,
desde
with the
la entrada
soccer league,
a las medidas
since
de
the
sana
very
distancia del doctor
beginning
Ricardo Cortés, precisamente,
of the
también ha
safe
sido nuestra
distancing campaign.
nuestro
Dr.
protagonista
Ricardo
de
Cortés
cara en
has
este
been
año.
our
Ahora quisiera
liaison
aprovechar la
there, so
oportunidad
we're
de retomar
going
sobre la
to
pregunta que
speak in
hizo
more
nuestra
detail
compañera Araceli de Canal 11
on Friday,
sobre el derecho de
taking up
admisión.
Aracelis
Para
from
que quede
Canal
muy claro,
Once's
en
question
México es
about the
ilegal
right
derecho
of
de admisión.
admission. In Mexico, it
Esto
is
está
illegal
concentrado en el artículo primero de nuestra
to
Constitución
reserve
y en la ley para
the
prevenir y
right
eliminar la
to admit
discriminación.
people
Entonces,
in a
nunca nos
local. This
confundamos
is
si hay una
aimed to prevent
disposición de carácter
discrimination.
sanitario
So
que es de
if there
aplicación
is a
general,
health
ya sea en todo el territorio o como
provision that
sea
is
ahora
going to
en
have
las
general
distintas entidades
application,
federativas,
like right
debe
now
haber una
across the
justificación
different
para tomar
states, there
decisiones,
might
pero
be
no es reservarse el
justification
derecho
in
de
order to
admisión,
make
no es facultad
decisions,
de los
but you
particulares
cannot prevent
decidir
the
si a
entrance
sí
of
mismos quién
anyone,
entra y quién
and
no en
private
un establecimiento,
individuals
ni
won't
siquiera aplica una ley
decide
más
who enters
de
and
salud.
who
Solo
doesn't
para no sé qué esta
in
confusión. Por favor,
local
usted.
out of health prevention
Buenos días, efectivamente.
measures.
Juan
Thank
Hernández
you.
del periódico Basta y de
Hello,
Grupo
Juan
Cantón.
Hernandez
Esta
from the
medida de
Basta
echar atrás
newspaper and
precisamente
Grupo
esta medida de
Canton.
eliminar los fines de semana
This
largos,
measure of
¿cuánto representa en términos
eliminating
de
long
empleos o
weekends,
cuántos
how much does it
empleos han
represent
rescatado?
in terms of
Y se torna
employment?
más
How many
importante. Bueno,
employment
decimos
jobs have been rescued?
se
And could you
significaría
please
precisamente
repeat what
esta
you
derrama
said?
económica de los fines de semana largos.
This economic
Comenté
uh,
que
injection
esto
of capital
representa
during long weekends. Can
más o
you
menos
uh,
7, 8 puntos
mention
más
the
de
figure
ocupación,
again? It is 7 or 8
casi 5
points
millones
more in
de
terms of
turistas
occupancy,
regionales
nearly
y
5 million
casi 2 millones de
domestic
turistas
tourists
hospedados. Esas son
and
las
almost 2
cifras,
million
2
tourists
millones de turistas hospedados en
in
hoteles.
hotels.
Una
I'm rounding
derrama
up figures, 2
impresionante
million
de
people in hotels. This is
38.378
an
millones de pesos el
impressive
consumo
uh,
total de estos fines
economic
de semana largos.
activity
Entonces, pues
during
vamos inclusive
long
a
weekends.
hablar
So
como lo hicimos el
we're
año pasado
even
con el
going
secretario de
to
Educación
do
haciendo
something as we
algunos
did last year
reajustes
with the Minister
bajos
of
como coordinador
Education
al sindicato para ver si nos regala
and the different
para
unions.
poderlo acomodar para otro puente, pero aunque no sea por
Let's
ley, es
sometimes
solicitud
we're
tuya
bargaining.
el
We
permiso
take
de los
days
pagos de
from
familia
one
en el
month and we
sentido
put them
de que
together
este tipo de
into a
actividades
specific weekend
une a la familia,
because these activities
significa
are good for family
el
bonding.
criterio
They
de nacionalismo
foster
sobre los lugares bellos que
a
tenemos en
sense of
nuestro país y por
nationalism
ello
in
también el
relation to all the
presidente
beautiful
accedió
places that
a
we have in our country.
clasificar
And the
y
president
establecer de esta
himself
forma el turismo
agreed
interno también del
not
país.
to eliminate long weekends and to foster and support the touristic sector this way. So, when would
Son los
be
mismos
that date?
sentidos que tienen
When
otros
can we
hoteles en
expect
lugar nada
this
más de
to
tener
happen?
un
That would be the same
60% de ocupación,
instead
solo
of having
7 puntos por
60%
el mismo
occupancy
personal
in a
que tendrá
hotel,
que estar
you will
trabajando
only
en el
increase 7
hotel.
points
Cada
more
hotel
because
trabaja
every
directo
hotel has
supervisado.
their own standard. It's like
Hágale.
3 direct jobs and 3.5 indirect jobs
Muchas gracias.
created per
Desafortunadamente
hotel.
son las 19:50.
Thank you very much.
Vamos a tener que
Unfortunately,
tomar otra
it's
pregunta hoy, pero mañana continuamos.
7:58. It's
Y
58
solo
minutes
quisiera cerrar
past 7, so
agradeciéndoles
we
a cada
don't
uno
have
de
time to
turismo,
take any more questions.
también al
I would
secretario de
like to
Transporte
thank
por
the
no estar aquí en
Minister of
comunicaciones con
Tourism and
ustedes,
the Minister
porque este
of
trabajo
Communications and
coordinado
Transportation.
nos
He's
ha dado
not
mucha
here
tranquilidad.
today, but
Insisto,
this
al inicio de la
orchestrated work
epidemia
has
se pudo
allowed
tomar
us at the
acciones
very beginning
y
of the epidemic to take
manteniendo un correcto
actions
equilibrio con la
in
parte
terms
económica,
of
un sector
public
tan
health
relevante para la
and to
economía
make a
mexicana,
balancing act
y también
regarding the Mexican
lograrlo
economy
durante el proceso
and
del primer
achieving
ciclo
this
epidémico
during
y en los
the
meses por
first
venir. Muchas gracias,
cycle of the
secretario.
Muchas
epidemic,
gracias por
and this will
dejar
apply for the
previsto
months to
comprar su
come. Thank you very
estadía
much.
y
And
será
please remember,
próximamente
travel for
todos
Mexico
los
by
paquetes
handicrafts,
y las
and
grandes
very
promociones
soon
que
you're
ya
going
integramos,
to
que hemos
see
venido
all the different
trabajando
packages and
muy de
promotions that
cerca con el
we have
sector
been
privado.
putting
El sector
together,
privado
and
ha
we've
sido y
been working
seguirá
closely
siendo
with the private
la
sector.
parte
The private
fundamental
sector
para detonar
has
economía
been
en
and
este
will
país. Muchas
continue
gracias.
being
Gracias,
fundamental
secretario.
to
Muchas
trigger
gracias.
the economy in our country. Thank you very much, Secretary. Thank you. everyone.
Yay!